Let's explore this idea of a red thread and a multiple stakeholder chain with a real life example. Imagine a hospital which does MRI scans on children. Now, MRI machines are horrible things. They're warm, they're noisy, they're claustrophobic. So when you put a child in one of those, naturally they get anxious and they start to squirm. Now the problem is, not only does a doctor not want the child to squirm, they need them to stay really very, very still. Even breathing in and out can change their ability to get the image that they want and the diagnosis that they need. So they ask the child to stay very, very still and they hold their breath. But of course, this whole process makes the child ever more anxious, and ultimately they have to do multiple rescans. The child gets really, really concerned. The parents are traumatized by the whole experience, and sometimes the doctor had to actually sedate the child by the end of the process in order to get the image that they want. So let's plot our stakeholder chain here. At one end we have the end user, which in my view is the child. Without a child there is no need for a children's hospital, there is no need for a paediatrician, there is no need for any of this in the first place. So we could plot our stakeholder chain and we have our child, and then we have the child's parents, and then maybe the MRI machine operator, and then the paediatrician, the physician that's looking after the child, and then down the other end of the chain, moving closer to the manufacturer, we probably have the purchasing department within the hospital, and maybe the payer, the insurance company, and then ultimately the manufacturer of the machine. Now, in our model, what we need to do is start by saying, who is the key stakeholder? Well, you might say the child is the key stakeholder because they're the end user. But in this case, I wouldn't agree with that. I think the child may be traumatized by this experience, but only once. They only go through this process occasionally, maybe only once in their entire life. Whereas the MRI operator in a children's hospital, they have to experience this multiple times, maybe multiple times every day. If we ask the parent or the child to give us all the insights that make this worse, to help us generate solutions, they're going to give us a very limited amount of information. Whereas the MRI operator, who's experienced it daily, is going to be able to give us the most detail about the problem. When it happens, how it happens, what sort of children it's more likely to happen with, what solutions they've tried, what have failed, what seems to work. They are our key stakeholder because they will be the biggest advocate for getting this thing fixed, and they will be able to give us far more granularity in the insight. So our insight starts with the MRI operator. But what we now need to do is we now need to establish that if that problem went away, that it would also create value for everyone up and down the chain. Well, naturally, it would create value for the child, because if we could reduce the anxiety, they would be happier, and so would the parents. So that's pretty easy. Looking down the chain, we're not changing the problem or the insight. We are seeing whether we can articulate that insight in a way that means there is value to other people. Would there be value to the physician of the child being less anxious? Of course, because they would be able to do their job quicker, and they would also be able to get a better image, and they would be able to do a better diagnosis, which would increase their ability to do their job, their prestige, all of that kind of thing. If we move down the chain, the purchasing department, well, every rescan costs money, maybe thousands and thousands of dollars every time an unnecessary rescan occurs, so there would be a cost saving in making this thing more smooth. There would be a throughput advantage in terms of the number of people who could use that facility or that room or that machine. So the purchasing department see an advantage to solving this problem, and then of course the insurer who has to pay for it, they obviously see an advantage to cost saving. What I would say is, as we move to the left in the chain, we tend to experience the articulation of the problem in a much more logistical and financial sense, and as we move down to the right of the chain towards the end user, they normally experience an articulation of the value in a much more emotional, practical sense. What we have established here, though, is in solving the insight of the key stakeholder, we can demonstrate value to everyone in that chain, and that's a concept known as creating and demonstrating a red thread.